Here's some critical thinking about elections and voting and how to prevent the case of fraud or presentation of fraud. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. I work in environments where we have attestations and certifications on software platforms that transactions were actually counted as they should be. I've worked in the banking and financial systems. I've worked in the government contracting arenas. Hiring a company to provide machines to support voting, anything other than a mechanical sorter, is very dangerous. For one, a company like Dominion Voting, for example, can become a leader in the field and claim a monopoly on the vote counting machines. Now, when you look at something that's mechanical, it's very easy to audit. It's very easy to review. It's very easy to look through. So if there's a ballot counter that's simply a multi-purpose Scantron machine, so it's basically used for school tests as much as it's used for voting, there are less components that could fail on that. And so the complexity of the machine is less. And in fact, the minimum complexity and the most elegant solution is a paper ballot with some kind of carbon copy or takeaway where the voter actually gets a copy of their vote. And both the original ballot and the ballot they take home is certified by a 3D textured stamp. Now, that's done in some places. It was done historically, and there are other ways of voting that was mechanical. But my point being, and as part of a critical thinking exercise here, is that the least complex system is the most likely system to provide accuracy in the case of voting and the minimal amount of overhead associated with some kind of objection to the vote. See, every presidential election since the first one and every presidential election in nearly every country has someone who says the vote was invalid. They hired people who weren't citizens to vote on behalf of that candidate. They manipulated the counts or the machines, or the volunteers were, recruited in order to change the vote. There's always that suspect of voter fraud in all cases, whether it be someone is a poor loser or there really was voter fraud. You know, people want things, they'll make it happen. So a ballot that has a carbon copy or a certified copy that is retained by the voter, well, a vote recall could simply call the voters back and redo the count. However, in a modern world, we feel like we need modern solutions. And so voting machines, tabulators, and other equipment is brought in place that can all malfunction. We've had historical votes where the tabulating machine ate the ballot sheets. The ballot sheets went through and got chewed up and came out the other side, and they had to reconstruct the votes. Well, there's more to it than simply counting the ballots when you have something as important as an election. And this is one of the reasons why direct count votes do not determine presidents and other types of political offices. They're actually done through the electoral system. And the direct count votes are very easy to manipulate. We're not going to go into that because this isn't about conspiracy to manipulate voting results. This is about when you look at problems in your business, how do we find solutions that get us to a position where we have the least amount of overhead and conflict after the decision is made? How do we create systems that are eloquent and simple so that they have the least number of moving parts and are less likely to fail? See, when you're doing a website, for example, I've worked on websites that have millions of unique visitors a day. Now, that just isn't go to GoDaddy or HostGator and get a website. That's multiple servers on the front end working as a proxy that balance load. That's several application servers. That's a database server that might be running in parallel with a backup system. That's a complex environment that will fail on a daily basis. A very simple website with 1 or 2 visitors a day can go on any hosting. But hosting that for 100,000 or even 1 million visitors a day is a different type of platform. However, the more complex you make the system to do the work, the more likely the system is to have failures, natural inbuilt failures. So Dominion voting, those systems are used in Canada, they're used in the United States, and they're used in a variety of other countries. The question would be to ask is, do they ever have problems in the past? Are the problems in a pattern? Are these patterns something that can be removed or have a second path to prevent? Now, when you're voting on a screen and it's 100% digital, how do you know your vote's counted? Well, some of these machines print receipts, and those receipts go to individual citizens. Well, there are concepts here that must be in place to make what is questionable legitimate and what is legitimate questionable. And from a critical thinking perspective, again, making things simple makes it easier for the audience to understand it. We have complex computer machines. Computers can be easily manipulated. Everybody's computers at home have problems. Therefore, this voting system is questioned. Now, the voting system really could be manipulative because, again, it's a complex systems and something could be hidden down in a layer of code that if your preferred candidate is not receiving the votes that they should, that the system would automatically change over votes. And then it would, these voter cards, for example, when they write these things onto the USB drives or microchips to take to a different machine, what would prevent it from getting copied? Are we using some kind of hash key to make sure that each vote is individual and independent? And was that hash key printed out on a physical card that could later be scanned in through a minimal system or a validation system to make sure that the original votes are good? Now, it's embarrassing how the media and how our government is handling this case of voter fraud, because in the procurement process, there ought to have been some kind of backup. So, hey, we're going to use these voting systems over here, but the receipt that comes out of the voting system can be scanned in and verified with this other system. Or we're going to use a digital system, however, it produces a paper card, which then can be audited. Or it produces 3 copies of a paper card, one that goes home with the voter, one that goes to the voting administration is simply locked up in a vault, and then the last one is used to verify counts if necessary. You see, your design of the system is more important than the actual system that you use, because you can verify all these things on paper. You can test your concepts and your assumptions on paper. And then when the system is implemented, you can systematically address what is going on. Now, what's going on today in the U.S. politics for the presidential election is very complex. There are likely hundreds of players involved. Some of them are going for one candidate. Some of them are going for another. There are media stations that would prefer to see somebody win versus someone else win. There's incentives for voting. For example, 40 to 50% of the U.S. population is dependent on government subsidies. They're either businesses that want government subsidies or get government subsidies, or they're individuals who are living on welfare or some kind of government program where they believe that if their candidate doesn't win, they're going to lose these benefits, and therefore they have an incentive to drive forward. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's the very first election in the United States or it's the next election. There will always be questions. My concern is that the critical thinking factors are not there in order to demonstrate how a system could work correctly. So, again, an electronic system collects the votes. It prints out 3 copies. One goes to the individual who voted. One goes into a vault. One goes to the alternate count. If there are questions, then we have 3 ways of verification. See, you can build that into your procurement specification. You can get that in the RFP, and then companies can design a machine that is easy to validate. Now, if you have a machine and you have conflicting interests, then you ought to be looking at those as well. We have laws on the books today about conflicts of interest, anti-competition. We have laws today about foreign interests as far as foreign influence and third-party risk. All these factors can be considered. So here's what I want you to take away. Inside strategic relations is about the relationship between individuals. If you want to manipulate a system, you can stack that system with individuals who would make a manipulation possible. So, for example, if you want to stack the voting system, you design the system in such a way so it will repeat or produce the results that you desire. If you have a highly complex system, you're more likely to be able to get the results without the opposition questioning it. Yet, if you want to have results that have minimal conflict in the long run, then you want to design a simple system that the general public can understand, that shows transparency and has a external means of validation. Okay? Now think about what I've just said. Now you have to ask who's designing the system, who's involved in producing the system. It could be some rogue person at Dominion Voting who's decided that one person should be president over another because they have conflict of interest. We don't know that. Again, a simple paper ballot system has worked so well for generations because it has very few moving parts. You're not going to blame the paper for changing. You know, when you have the 3 printouts, it would be the individual's responsibility in their little voting booth to make sure all 3 copies look the same and then to deposit the copies accordingly. And if they fail to do so, though, it's their vote, their failure. But again, when we introduce complex machines, the complexity of the machine itself allows for fraud. It could prevent fraud, or it could be perceived as having fraud. And so again, how do we simplify that solution? You want to take home these skills because the problem is the same in other places. The liability of your company. Firearms manufacturers are receiving liability for an inanimate device because of the way the user implements it. Those cases could become precedent for vehicle manufacturers like Tesla, who have automation in their vehicles to be responsible for the use of those vehicles by the occupant or by the driver. You have an issue where you're holding manufacturers in New York, for example, you're punishing manufacturers of sweets and sugary drinks for the behavior of the users of those drinks. Now, of course, sugar is addictive, and perhaps there is liability there in the amount of sugar put into products. But again, wouldn't it be better to educate or to provide resources to the users of the product so that they were more informed and more able to use the product correctly? There's a individual responsibility. Now, this is not a program about social manipulation or engineering of environments, because if you can, the dumber they are, the easier they are to manage. You can make people ignorant of their own responsibility so that you will have power giving them back their responsibility. But overall, when talking about voting systems, when talking about tabulation, when talking about general accounting, keep it simple. Keep it simple. You want to be looking at what complexities contribute to possible risks, what risks are caused, reputational risk is an example. You have algorithms and model risk. What factors can be looked at in the beginning, and then reducing the complexity of the system helps take those risks out, or at least provide transparency or auditing in order to know that the results are accurate. Is this really a complex problem that can be avoided and is avoided every day in business environments? But when you put it in the world of politics, there's so much emotion, there's so much desire, for power that, again, simple solutions. What is the most simple solution that can be validated, that can be observed, that can be implemented with the least amount of resources and funding, and has the least number of parties or conflicts of interests? That's what we're looking for with strategic relations. We're looking for the critical path. We're looking for the minimum viable solution. It's not always going to be the best solution, and people are going to lobby for different solutions. However, again, we want the solution that not only can be implemented easily, but has the least overhead in its follow-up, that has a reduced footprint and its impact to the environment. It has a reduced footprint as far as how it could be challenged. I know I've covered a lot here in today's podcast, and these are very complex issues. In fact, I find that diagramming out these components and these contributing factors helps you simplify the complex elements of this type of problem. Now, again, if you can solve this type of problem, even on paper, you can solve much more complex problems because it has a factor of formula. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about that factor of formula. I'll be happy to help you map out processes and identify their risk, where you can implement controls, and where you can identify potential challenges. And what you'll find is this is a powerful way to get into something without having all of the challenges and problems and drawbacks that a reasonable solution can have with unreasonable people. I want to thank you for listening. If you have questions, visit me at www.insidestrategicrelations.com. I'm Justin Hitt, and our newsletter is for high-income professionals and entrepreneurs who are subject matter experts, who want to solve big problems, who are in complex environments, and they want solutions that are sustainable. Thanks for listening.